Assalamu alaikum students, welcome to another lecture. How are you students? Are you all right? Okay, how was your listening skill and methodology as well? Fine, you all enjoyed? Good, good, that was really important. So I'm happy that you people are taking interest in these skills. Yes dear student, it's really important to be a good TOEFL instructor, to be a good TOEFL student. You need to know how to improve these skills of our learners. Fine? So let's start now. You want review? Yes, it's your right. Let's review the last lecture. So, what did we talk about? Who would tell me? No? You forgot? No, you remember. You remember, of course. You're with me? Yeah, we talked about methodology. Yes, good. And we talked about principles of what? Language teaching methodology. Yeah, you all remember. You're all good students. See? Which principle talk about? Which principles? Who would tell me? They are on your fingertips. Focus on the learner. Very good. Then what? Personal methodology. Good. Third, what is that? Sequencing. What is sequencing? Yes, pre-task, task and feedback. Next one, what is it? Classroom activities. Again what? Methodology. Clear? Very simple. These were the principles of language teaching methodology. Very good. I am happy that you people are, things are on your fingertips. Yeah, good. So this is the the spirit. Please go on with that, right? So these things should be on your fingertips, and once you will be practicing teachers, and you are, some of you are practicing teachers, yeah, would help you things. Fine? So please go on with this pace, right? Now we are going a bit faster because we have done almost 22 lectures. Today we are here for, oh good, 23rd lecture of which course? This TOEFL, teaching of English as a foreign language. I'm fast? No, teaching of English as a foreign language. Good. So let's start. I gave you the review. Why do you want it more? You want in black and white? Here you are for your understanding. So yeah, discussion on principles of teaching language methodology, right? We've talked about principles of what? Foreign language teaching methodology. 4 principles, no, 5 principles. Yeah, we talk about focus on the learner. Remember that. We talk about sequencing, right? We talk about teacher should have his own methodology. Remember that? Yeah, we talk about that. And then we talk about what? You see? How we can help learners. How can we improve involvement of learners in the class? This is important. And what we talk about some points. Remember that? Help the learner to communicate. Ask the learner to use language of the class. Yes, create environment for language learning. Fine. So if you create that environment, language learning would be faster. Remember that? Yes, you can all do that. These were some tips we talked about, and of course you can read your book as well. There are more tips are given. Fine, you need to read those tips and see and try them in your class, and if you try, you will find them useful. Fine students? Clear? Are you all right? Fine. So, are you with me? Getting? Yes. All right. So this is what we do them, my dear student, that well, give opportunities to make choices between different options in the classroom. Right. So these are the points we talked about in the last class, that we, in fact, we talked about these, how can we involve audience in the class, right? Audience involvement. And I gave you some tips for that. I asked you to create environment for language learning in that institution where you are teaching that language, or even of course, I mean, you being teacher, you can direct the students, and of course being learners also. Yeah, if you want to improve your skills, so you need to what? Practice these skills. And I tell you, of course, some institutions, they really focus on that, and they don't let their students communicate in any other language except for the target language that is being taught there, and see the response of that, of course. And in some institutions, teachers don't care, administration doesn't care for it, but then we see that students, I mean, cannot communicate, cannot learn their language well. Classroom activity is fine, because that is for maybe in a day you have 4 hours, But of course, off the class, if the student create opportunities, they make their communities to learn that language, so that would be a real success. Fine. So we also talk about listening skill, right? We saw that listening is an active skill. Well, students, so we talk about these listening skill, and we saw that what is the importance of listening, what is listening itself, right? It's an active process, in fact, a purposeful way, right, to make sense what somebody says, what we hear. Fine. And then we talk about that this listening is an active skill, and also we talk about a misconception that people feel that it is what listening is passive skill. Why? Because you just listen, right? This person is speaking and you are listening. So people, this is a misconception, because now we talk about the active listening. The listener remains active. You are active now. I can see your faces, in fact, right? You are smiling and you are enjoying and you are taking notes as well. So you are active listeners. And when I ask you a question, you respond me. Yes? Are you with me? Yes. See, look at here. You nod your head. Say yes. Yes, sir. So what is it? You give me a response, both verbal and non-verbal response. Good. So it's an important thing, in fact. Listening is very important, right? The speaker speaks. Listener should listen actively. How? Active listening is very important. Clear? Fine? So let's start today's lecture. Last lecture was very easy, enjoyable, and you all have done well. That's why I allocated less time for the review. I know things are on your fingertips, because we repeated all those things time and again, so that you would understand, you would internalize, and you would be able to take your exam well. Fine? So methodology, simple. Before that, curriculum development, right? And then principles of foreign language teaching. In other words, principles of language teaching methodology. 5 principles I gave you. They are on your fingertips. So we started listening as well. Let's move on with the listening skill, my dear students. Today we talk about the background to the teaching of listening. Why? What is the background? Right? Again, schema. Okay? So my dear students, if you go back historically, mind you, you all know that we talked about earlier in your linguistics subject, you must have talked about that initially, of course, if you see historically, so learning a foreign language meant learning to read and write. Only mean what? Literacy skill. That, or of course, initially the concept was that, well, do you want to learn a language? Yeah, you need to read and write. That's fine. This was the, old concept. That language is what? Language is to read and to write. If you are able to read that language, or you are able to write that language, fine. That was the old concept of language learning. So what happens that, see, and then once the reading and writing was focused, right, we see that, but what happened then? You see, listening was ignored. Listening was virtually ignored, in fact. There was no, in fact, focus on listening skill, because people felt that, well, reading is important and writing is important. You want to learn that language? Just learn these skills. Well, so naturally when you feel that listening, is not important, and you consider reading and writing more important, so of course this skill would be ignored. But in 1800 onwards, of course, for the first time, yeah, linguists and people started thinking that, well, listening is an important skill, right? And again, how? Again, there this change in thoughts, and of course change in the shift in the paradigm was that once this Charles Bertelsmann, right, he promoted what? The teaching of listening skills, comprehension, and the idea that new teaching points should be introduced orally, in fact. This was the Charles Bertelsmann's viewpoint, and he for the first time promoted, so he was the promoter of this, what? See, teaching of listening skills, and also listening comprehensions. That the learner should be able to comprehend the message. The learner should be able to understand what meaning behind the message. So this was the Charles Bertelsmann, of course. He gave this idea for the first time, and that this idea again speaks for the importance of listening skill. And again, you know that of course the natural process of learning a language is what, that you first you listen, and then again you speak and read and write. So this was the idea given by the birds, right? And of course the idea was definitely, I mean, the given, and people accepted it, and people realized that, well, you see, without listening, in fact, without there is an input, you cannot give oral output, mean they won't be good speaking. So that's why still we say that of course good listeners are good speakers. Then after, of course, even some say after the World War, or say before the World War, in fact after the First World War, what happened, this audiolingual method, ALM, you all know this method, right? There are two views about it. Some say after the World War, and some say, of course, mean the before the World War. Once we needed people for the Second World War, so Americans particularly, they in fact defended, financed universities, in fact, to have a method of the teaching where learner would have native like proficiency in their language. So that's the audiolingual method came to dominate foreign language teaching. So, and then with this method, language labs were in fact established. Clear? Because you know that ALM, very simple, what? The language should be learned through drills so that it becomes habit of the learner. So focus was on structures of language, and also what? The behavioral, right? The activities, the drills. Remember that? So, of course, the one I'm going to post office, and of course everybody says that. And people, of course, I mean, a lot of drills were given, there were repetitions were there were chain drills were there. And of course, the principle behind was that give as many drills as you can so that it becomes, that expression becomes the habit of the learner. So you know that, of course, at the back end, there were, of course, of this ALM, the behavioral theory was there, and also structuralist theory was there. Remember that, students? Yes. Move on. Good. So then in 1970s and 1980s, what happened? The introduction of CLT, you all know it, right? That for the first time, this idea, of course, communicative language teaching was, of course, I mean, came in use, right? And people, of course, started thinking that, well, the CLT is important, that language should be taught for the communicative purposes. And how we can do that? Yes, remember that? Of course, to teach the language communicatively so that the learner would be more, would be able to communicate in that language. So then, of course, the listening plays a key role for communicative ability. I mean, if you want to help students in their communication, if you want to improve their communicative ability, so how can you do that without listening? So definitely make students listen, and once they listen more, they will be able to communicate well, because this is the key, in fact. Well, it's what plays a key role for communication ability. Clear? Then you all know what Stephen Christian's input hypothesis made a major impact on language teaching. This hypothesis here, you can have a look, that for language learning to occur, it is necessary for the learner to understand input language which contains linguistic items that are slightly beyond the learner's present linguistic competence. This is important. That input language. Now, what is input language? Again, listening also is given. I mean, input, of course, you would say that reading is also input skills. Fine. Since we are talking about listening skills, so Stephen Christian's, the hypothesis, of course, definitely holds water for our area under discussion, that for language learning to occur, in fact, we need to have input, and that input would be in shape of that listening skill. Clear, students? Fine? All right. So, dear students, in fact, what are the principles of teaching listening? Very important area. That, of course, we are TEFL students, and of course, we have to help our learners in this skill, right? We have to improve their listening skills. So, how can you teach? Right? How can you teach? Because you are the student of teaching English as a foreign language. So when you teach a foreign language, so you teach 4 skills, for example. So how to teach, right? What are the principles for teaching listening skills? So first principle, my dear students, yes, expose students to different ways of processing information. Yeah, definitely, of course, your listeners, your learners, they process informations differently, in fact. I hope you understand. You all know it. Every learner, every listener has different ways to process information. Some learners, for example, generally, of course, they in fact evaluate things at macro level, right? Some people go in depth micro level, in fact. I hope you understand. So this, the point is that analysis of the learner, right, it varies from learner to learner. Some learner process it, in fact, at micro level. Some learner, in fact, want to have micro details, and some learner, in fact, just see it, in fact, right, I want to have overview of something. So that is what we call it, the macro level learning, in fact. So here what we are to do, the first principle is for this language, for this teaching listening skill, for example, that we have to expose our learners to different ways of processing information. One can be bottom up versus top down. Now what is bottom up? In fact, very simple, of course. When you see things from micro level, you are standing, of course, for example, what? At the bottom of a wall, for example, and you see up, so you can have, in fact, you can see different bricks, you can see the concrete, you can see the cement and everything. So that is what the bottom up approach. You see from the top, and you can have, what you can have? You can have maximum, what? You see, the view of things. Alright, so other approach is what we call it top-down approach. Even when you are standing at the wall, you cannot have minor details. Fine, you will just have an overview, right? So a global view, for example, right? But if you want to have more details, you should stand at the bottom, fine, and then you can see it. So that's why, of course, when talking about different ways of processing information, so we have one, the bottom up versus top down, and this approach is proposed by, yes, well, Rummelhar and Ortony, in fact, 1977, and again it was expanded by Cauldron and Richards in 1986. Also more work is done on that in 1995 by another researcher, that is also Richards. So students start with their, in the bottom up approach, what happens? They start with the component parts, the words, grammar, etc. Right? When you, of course, the principles of teaching listening, for example, the first principle is that expose students to different ways of processing. So one process can be that bottom up approach, where you want students, and the student try to have the basic components. They go at the word level, in fact, we go at what? The grammar level, the sentence pattern is that clear, right? So the top down, I told you, is the opposite. Learners start from their background knowledge, in fact, their either content, schema, and all that. So in very simple words, when you come down, the top down approach, you have a view of that. But when approach is bottom up, and the student process it in this way, bottom up processing is there. So then they go in detail, they can start from the minor components, but from the top-down approach, they cannot see the minor details, they see things at macro level. So being language instructor, being the student of the TEFL, once you use listening skill in the class, then you have to see that which kind of question you design. You want the students to have a journal view of that, the dialogue or that documentary, or you want to make the questions so that they would have to answer at the micro level, for example. You may ask that this sentence is there, what is the grammatical pattern of that sentence? Again, is that clear? Another course processing is interactive processing. Here in this processing, my dear students, both the top down and the bottom approach are combined. Fine. You can, in fact, exploit listening skill in the class. You can use listening in the class in such a way that you can ask questions, for example, right? You can ask question at the micro level and at the what? At the macro level, of course. So both question can be. So this interactive listening can work, in fact. So my dear students, of course, the first principle that I told you, that expose students to different ways of processing. Either it is top down, if you want to have them the macro level understanding of that dialogue, so top down is important. If you want them to have micro level understanding, so bottom up approach. If you want to have them understanding of at both micro and macro level, so then interactive processing can work. Is that clear? You understand? This is the first principle that you need to know it, of course. Now, second principles of for teaching listening skill, that is what? Expose students to different types of listening. There are different types of listening. Is that clear? You know that? What is it? Okay, listening for specific information. Fine, good, good. All right. All right. So dear students, well, there are different ways, different types of listening. Fine. The first one is, yes, you know that? Being a teacher, what do? We need to expose our students to different types of listening. So mind you, before we do that, things should be kept in mind that it is not what listeners listen to, it is what they listen for. Again, it's a very important point, right? That listeners, in fact, important thing is that in fact, the listeners, what do they listen? Fine. So it is not important what listeners listen to. It is what they listen for. What information they want to get, in fact. Right? So that's why different types of listenings are there. So listening for specific information. What does it mean? Yes, for example, names. For example, specific language form or time and all that. Date of birth of a person. This is what listening for specific information. Clear? So if you, once you teach this skill, and of course you make activities, so you see, one kind of listening is you need to know what are different types of listening, specific information. I give you examples. Second, again, global or gist listening, for example. Again, for specific listening, bottom-up approach can be used. Fine. Bottom-up processing can be used. For this, for example, for global or gist listening, yes, what can you do? That is what the top-down approach can be used. You want to know what does it mean, for example, there is a paragraph, what does that paragraph say? What is this article about, for example? What is this discussion about? Just talks, for example, this dialogue is about pollution, this dialogue is about politics, this dialogue is about US policies. So this global understanding of that. So for this, we can use top-down approach, top-down processing. So listening for specific information. Second, global or gist listening. Third one is also critical type of listening, inference, in fact. Listening to infer meaning, in fact, right? This is what we call it listening between the lines. Like we have an idiom, read between the lines, but here we listen between the lines. What is the implied meaning, for example? Right? So, it's raining outside, I'm in. Means that implied meanings are not going out. Clear? It's hot outside. So, means that, well, I'm not going out. So, this is what means listen between the lines. Is that clear? Do you understand? Okay. So, this is what, of course, we call it different types of listenings are there. Listening for specific information, fine. Listening for gist, for global, we call it global listening. And then, what else we call it, my dear students? Yeah, sometimes we listen to infer. What is the inference? To get meaning, right? So this is about listening for inference. And then, my dear students, another principle is teach a variety of tasks, in fact. Definitely, you cannot say only by listen and summarize this dialogue, this one summary. Fine. So of course that, see, you can use variety of tasks while in fact using this skill in the class. So you can ask listen and repeat, one can be, or listen and disagree or agree. Is that clear? Listen and predict. So variety of tasks. Is that clear? So maybe you in fact make students listen to 3 dialogues and you ask them in fact compare. Fine. Of course, elements of dialogue 1 with dialogue 2. Find the differences between dialogue 2 and dialogue 3, for example. So what this principle is, they teach variety of tasks in fact. Clear? The first one is, what is it? First principle, you remember that? Yes. Students do different ways of processing. Second is, expose students to different types of listening. Third one is, variety of tasks should be used. So another is, my dear students, what is it? The context. The fourth principle for, yes, teaching listening skill. Good. So context is also important. So in context, what do you see? The text, right? Fine. Context, task, difficulty and authenticity. Definitely, of course, when you use that text for listening in the class, so see that which kind of text you are using, which kind of dialogue you are using in that listening. What is in fact? Is it easy, difficult, right? Ambiguous, unclear? What is it in fact? What is the difficulty level of that text? And also its authenticity. Fine? This is important. That we need to consider text, difficulty and authenticity of that. What we use in the listening class. Is that clear? So this is very important. Here Brown and Manis suggest looking at 2 aspects of authenticity. But before that, this text is important, right? Again, if you talk about CLT, so we saw that, authentic material was used, of course, for teaching, right? So the point is, if you talk about total physical response, the teacher in fact makes students listen. Is that clear? And then of course the point is that you see sometimes you see that the teacher brings a dialogue, so he plays that dialogue, of course. So which kind of text, which kind of dialogue can be taught in the class? Again, you need to be very, very careful for that. Again, you need to keep audience needs in mind. You need to keep audience level of understanding, for example. Clear? So that's why, for example, if you are, helping students in their IELTS exam, so if you are preparing students for IELTS exam, so then you can have a text that would help them. For example, you can have a dialogue from see where teacher and student they interact. You can have a lecture on, of course, in being delivered in the university where the professor is giving a lecture. So that can be. And again, the difficulty level. Sometimes the students find the text very easy. That material is very easy, in fact. So you need to be very careful that which kind of text should be used and what should be its difficulty level, right? Again, that where are you? Maybe initially at the start of the class you start with what? Very easy what dialogues. I refer to BBC. So initially, of course, just personal profile introduction, and then you move on. And then authenticity of that also is important. That I gave you the view that Brown and Manis suggest that 2 aspects of authenticity should be considered in mind. Task authenticity means that what? Simulated, in fact. What is it? Modeled after the real life. Right? For example, some people, even they can have their voices record. They can have a dialogue record. Fine, possible, of course. Or a non-academic task such as filling in a form. You can do that. The all minimal one that checks understanding, but in a way that is usually done outside of the classroom. So this means task authenticity is there. It can be simulated or it can be what? Minimal. So again, here mean talking about the input authenticity. What is it? That yes, there are some features of this: genuine, altered, adapted, simulated, or against minimal or incidental. Fine. So again, sometimes you see you take a chunk from YouTube, for example, from any news session, for example. You can have a news, recorded in fact, and you can use that. That is a genuine one, of course, right? I mean, if you record a documentary, in fact, so you can do that from BBC, possible, fine. Or you altered it, in fact, you can change it as per the needs, fine. Or you can adapt it to the local culture, local environment. Or you can simulate it, in fact, make it to real life or to non-academic situations. And then, of course, sometimes minimal, incidental, any incidents. So these are something, of course, that input authenticity is also important. Which one? Input, of course. Now, dear students, again, what are the teaching, of course, teach listening strategies, for example. The fifth principle, right? What? Listening strategies. Fine. So what are the listening strategies, by the way? Predicting. Fine. Mind you, we're talking about what are the principles for teaching listening skill. So this one strategy can be predict. What does it mean, by the way? You ask the students to listen and predict, for example. Right? Listen and predict. For example, well, you see, it's raining outside, the cloud is thundering, fine, and what happens? You see, there is silence outside, no traffic is outside, fine. So what do you predict? Now you can, this can be dialogue. You ask students to predict, so you can predict, well, you better stay at home. Yeah, prediction. Or, for example, well, student, you have shown a very bad result in the last midterm exam. You could not qualify. You are below that margin line. You need to work very hard. So this is one idea, students, that prediction is there. You ask students to predict. So the principle is that, well, yeah, you being TEFL instructors, yeah, you need to teach listening predict what strategies. First one, prediction. Right? And definitely, of course, you can use this in the class. Fine. And then inferring, of course. What does inference mean? I told you, listening between the lines. One, infer something, get a message out of it. What are the implied meanings? That the speaker has not said, but he implies that you had better work hard. A statement is given by a speaker in a dialogue. So, what is the implied meaning? Yeah, you will flunk. You will not pass exam. Clear? You'd better work hard. So, when the speaker says that you had better work hard, it means that he knows, he's worried that you might not pass the exam. Exactly. You better leave now. See, again, maybe the implied meaning, something is going to happen. Is that clear? So, implied inference also means we can use that. Then again, monitoring, of course. You just see that monitor. So what? Predicting, inferring, and being a monitor. You monitor that, in fact. This also what? Listening. What? Strategy. Responding, in fact. Yes, people respond. Listen and repeat. Listen and agree. Listen and disagree. Is that clear? So people respond. Listen and speak. Fine? Alright. Listen and argue. Is that clear? Listen and persuade. You can do that. Or evaluating. Listen and evaluate. Example, two speakers are talking about, evaluate their speech. Who is a better speaker? Fine? The speaker 1 or the speaker 2. Or see where are they, for example. Try to know their background and all that. Fine. So these are what listening strategies. So being TEFL student, you need to know. Once you have a class and you are teaching this skill, so you can use all these techniques. You can ask students to predict, for example. But for that you have what? Text, you have dialogue. Fine. Again, it's a debatable what should we do. I mean, we talked about earlier that should we use dialogue from the local culture, or we should use dialogue from the culture of the target language. And we discussed earlier that it is not that the meaning that we get, again, of course, we come to know about the culture of the speaker. So if you want your learners to be able to know about the culture of the target language, so you can take a chunk from the culture. And if you just want to give them the information at superficial level, so locally recorded dialogue can be used, so it's a debatable in fact. Fine. So these are what mean strategies were there. Again, if you move on, that well, now in class what happened? These were the 5 principles, my dear students. Principle 1, teaching listening strategies, right? And then consider text, difficulty and authenticity, variety of tasks, students to different types of listening, and different ways of processing. These are 5 ways are there. Okay. Now classroom activities, what happens? Right? And the task. Dictation with difference. Definitely, of course, when you give dictation, student listen in fact and they write. Clear? So this is also a technique that can be used. Students are listening and then they are writing. They are penning down the ideas, of course. So again, this can be with difference, with pauses in fact. Sometimes you listen in one go. Fine, you start a story, fine, and then you finish it. But sometimes, of course, you give dictation with pauses. Clear? And again, you can give dictation by considering punctuation marks. So that student would know that now there is a pause, I need to put a comma here. Now, given of course a bigger pause, so I need to put a full stop. I hope you understand. So again, it could be listening with a difference. Then of course do it yourself. For example, yes, you are the creative teachers and you need to be creative. So again, modifying material to add listening for specific information. Whatever the needs are, you can modify it. And of course it can be micro listening at a micro level, mean if you want details. A word has been used and what does that word mean? And also sometimes the speaker uses a word and he gives the meaning of the word towards the end of a dialogue. So again, what does that word mean? Is that clear? Sometimes a speaker mispronounces a word and then you may expect the listener to find out which was the word and which was mispronounced. Right? So again you have to find out. So at a micro level mean bottom approach. Bits and pieces, of course, you're right, you can use that as well. Bits in chunks, of course, right? You can play a dialogue sample in bits. Fine? And then you ask students first they ask the students to listen that bit. After a pause, give them time to write down, of course. Right? And of course, what do I want to know in fact? Yes, that can be, you can use that. And this can be in the pre-listening before you start. You can give an idea, example, a teacher and a student dialogue. So you can ask in the pre-listening what do they want to listen. Want to have a dialogue on assignment submission. Fine, they want to have a conversation on what? On the results, for example, last exam that they have taken. Clear? So this is all, what are they talking about? Listening for a gist. Overview, in fact. So the classroom techniques can be, once you use the classroom techniques, you have to see that which kind of processing you want. Do you want a top-down processing or bottom-up processing? Top-down mean you just want general view of that, like we see the gist. But when you want to have detailed information, you want your listeners to have micro level information, so bottom-up approach can be. Which approach? Bottom-up approach can be used. Fine, students. Clear? Alright. So here mean again listening for main ideas. Right? Main idea. What are the main ideas? For example, you listen to a documentary and there are 5 different points are talked about. So what are the main ideas in that documentary? Okay. What is the order in fact? Again, in the classroom, you can ask that there are 5, once they know that there are 5 important events are covered, right? The speaker talked about talked about academic, talk about administration, talk about overall the management, right? So talk about admission policy. 4 things are there, the main ideas. Then what was the order? See, initially the writer, the speaker talked about fun, academic, then talk about administration, then other. Is that clear? So ordering can be asked. What was the order of events? Right? So this order was jumbled up, there was no sequence, or it was a sequenced order. And then, for example, a picture in a dialogue, for example, the speakers talk about a picture. So which picture is this, in fact? Maybe one of the speakers describes that picture, of course. So again, picture of what? Personality, or what? Any scenery, in fact. Fine. And then again, listening between the lines, told you the inference task. You ask the students to get the implied meaning, right? That these are the statements given by the speaker. What does he intend to say? Fine. So these are some of the classroom activities are there. I tell you again, for example, well, see, you can use that dictation. You can modify that task as per your needs, considering the student needs, in fact, right? You can adjust it accordingly, right? Again, micro listenings, small level, macro listenings at the bigger level. Fine. Dictation and close, right? Sometimes you give a passage, for example, and see, a dialogue is played and students are required to just fill in those blanks, in fact. A closed test means that, of course, some blanks are given, so they have to fill in the blanks, right? After listening to that dialogue or whatever documentary is there. Then for main ideas, yes, clear? Okay, all order. What is the order of that ideas, for example? And then pictures, of course, listening between the lines. All right, again, listening in a classroom. What happens, for example? A warm-up activity that targets, that integrates top-down and bottom-up processing. Very important. In the classroom, yes, pre-listening is important. The pre-listening, of course, what prepares the students. Fine, that helps the students to create their folders in their minds or to prepare them for the activity. So pre-listening is important. And then you come to the main listening, for example. I told you that, for example, you want to play a dialogue between a teacher and a student. So pre-listening can be, yes, a dialogue between, well, a teacher and a student. What do you expect in that dialogue, in fact? Clear? Or, I mean, for example, they talk about this discussion is on assignment or exam and all that. So that is called pre-listening. Fine. Before listening, in fact, there can be a warm-up activity. Fine. So, and then come to the last part, of course, that speaking task related to the previous task, in fact. I mean, once they have listened, then they are asked to speak on that. Clear? So again, listening is for speaking. Listening is a very important skill for good listening. So in the classroom, this can be used. That the pre-listening means the pre-task, warm up, and then come to the main area and come to the last part. So dear students, today, in fact, we'll talk about, rather, we try to cover important areas of listening skill. Fine? Very important. We started this skill in the last class. Remember that? Yes. So this today, in fact, we tried to complete this skill. That what is it? Active, purposeful, right way of getting a message, what the writer says, that makes sense, in fact. You see? And then we talk about it's a receptive skill. People say it's a passive skill, right? Why it's passive? Because you just listen, in fact, right? It's a misconception, of course, about listening skill. And then, of course, what we can do, what are the principles of what? Teaching listening skills. We talk about the principles, right? So, this is listening is an active, purposeful process, right? It involved what? Processing information based on both overall top-down schema and the bottom-up building blocks of language, such as vocabulary and grammar. Fine. So pre-listening is also important, right? It's a way to integrate a learner's processing, and exposing learners to a variety of tasks and different types of listening is also helpful. Clear? So when you expose learners, in fact, to different activities, yes, it's helpful, of course. So my dear student, yes, listening is a very important skill. You may ask question, whom to listen for good listening. And again, you being TEFL teacher, of course, I ask you a question that, yes, when you want to teach this skill, first of all, think about your listening skill. How have you improved your skill? If you have improved your listening in English, for example, and how have you done that? Right? What were your practices? Did you listen more, or did you watch more? What you did, in fact? And of course, what were the results of that listening? Do you feel that now you are a good listener or not? If you feel that, well, you have listened a lot and you can now listen well, it means that the practice listening really helped you. Is that clear? So some people watch movies, in fact, they listen to, of course, good speakers as well. Yes, I have seen so many the teachers, they are very good speakers. What they do? They listen to experts and they keep on listening, in fact. Right? So being TEFL students, of course, how can you improve listening of the students? This is important. We talk about different techniques here, in fact. We talk about what are the listening strategies that you can use in the class. We also talk about that which kind of text we should use, which kind of dialogue we should use for listening purpose, and what should be its authenticity. Fine. So ideally, of course, if you have your voice record, in fact, if you do it, fine. If you take dialogue from local culture, so that would help the learners. But initially you can do that, and of course, ultimately the learners, in fact, the listeners have to improve their listening in the target language. So a dialogue recorded in the target language, and of course in that environment, really helps a lot, in fact. So dear student, this is what, in fact, this is all about listening skill. Now, if you have any question, you can ask. Okay, what is active listening? Good. Well, students, active listening is a process of listening in which the listener remains active. So the question is how he can be active. He can only be active if he responds, right? And how he gives response? Oh yes. Oh no. See, when you nod your head, in fact, so you nod, it means you are responding. Or if you have asked me a question a while from now, so this shows that you are active listeners. So an active listener is the one who, what he does, students? He asks question, like you ask me question. What else? Yes, what else you expect from an active listener? What else he does? You see, he responds. And that response can be oral response, that can be verbal response. So he responds. Fine. And again, an active listener is the one who, in fact, involves his body language. Right? He gives gestures also. Yes. Is that you mean? Fine. So he stops you and then he asks you a question. If a listener is listening, then there could be two meanings, in fact. There could be two ways. Either he has listened everything, right? Or he could not get anything. Fine. So again, there are two ways, of course. And mind you, if you want to be good, language, of course, the learner, so listening is really important. Right? Listening to a foreign language is important. Listening to in fact, your teachers is important, right? Because listening improves your pronunciation, in fact. Other skills, other sub-skills are also improved. When you listen to a native speaker, so that speaking improves your pronunciation, right? You listen to a native speaker in that target environment, you come to know about the culture. You come to know about what? The stress pattern. You come to know about the weak forms and the strong forms of the speaker. So this, once you expose more to listening to that language, your definitely language learning enhances. So the pace enhances when you listen to that language more, of course, because a lot of input come and then you will be able to speak more. Is that clear? Any other questions? Why do we listen? Okay, good question, my dear students. Yeah, definitely, I've told you many times that good listeners are good speakers. Again, some people have some reservation for these comments, but generally it is accepted that, well, good listeners are good speakers. So if you are active listeners, I gave you the features of active listening, so naturally you will be good speaker. So active listeners become active speakers. So definitely you need to. Is that clear? So listen more, of course, right? Then you can be successful speaker as well. Any other question too? Yes? No question? Which activities we can use in the class? Okay, good. I gave you, in fact, if you see the slide again, that you can ask students listen and repeat, for example, listen and predict. You can use that. Or listen and evaluate, listen and respond, listen and agree, or listen or disagree, for example. You can use all these techniques, being careful instructors. Fine, got it? So different. And again, I want you to be creative. You can think of many other activities to be used in the class for listening particularly. Good. All right, of course. All right. Any other questions, students? Okay. Well, yes, this question is important, that why we start with the listening skill. It's a good question. We are following that natural process of language learning, because a child, in fact, starts listening first. Child listens and then he starts speaking, of course. So listening is, I mean, a very important, of course, plays an important role in language acquisition. So that is important, that we started with listening skill first. Clear? All right. So this was all. In fact, I hope you have got answers of all the questions. Still, you have any question, you can ask me. Then in the next class, I will answer you. So students, with this, today we covered listening skill, the first skill. Mind you, we have to talk about 4 skills. Clear? So see you inshallah in the next class. Till then, it's Allah Hafiz.